The year is 1021. A chill runs through the once bustling streets of Montecito. Only the ominous sound of a hammer permeates the silence, sinking the hearts of the residents deeper and deeper into despair with every strike. Another day, another gag order, issued in the name of their once beloved Duke and his new wife, a dreadful pair whom the residents only refer to as the despots. Okay, so that intro may have been a little bit dramatic, but what if I told you that it was based on a true story? Except it didn't take place in 1021, but rather 1,000 years later. Don't believe me? Well, get a load of this article. An exclusive from The Sun. Harry and Meg's aides tried to gag teachers and pupils as young as 5 at school where they filmed for their £80 million Netflix show. So this is the Harlem school where she rocked up dressed in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of clothing and jewelry at one of the most underprivileged schools in the entire country. Advisors for their Archwell Foundation demanded the school sign a clause banning anyone from making negative comments. This also related to any social media posts now or in the future. Requests under Freedom of Information rules reveal the lengths Archwell advisors went to protect the couple's image. They also show how their team banned 4 British newspapers, including The Sun, from an event at the World Trade Center despite being publicly owned. Emails reveal the planning for the trip started 6 months earlier, and it was spearheaded by Toya Holness, one of the Sussexes PR team. 3 days before the school visit, Archwell representatives emailed the Department of Education with the appearance release, including the gagging clause, and asking them to run it by their lawyers. An email from NYC School's press secretary, Danielle Filson, asked for the best way to get it agreed. It is unclear whether it was signed. The two sides also exchanged views over the language of the Department of Education press release. Ms. Filson wanted to take out the bench, saying, just wanted to make it a little bit less promotion-y. How on brand for Meghan Markle, isn't it? I mean, we all know that pseudo-royal tour that nobody asked for 2 years ago was a promotional tour. Not just for their book, but for themselves, and of course, more importantly, to film footage for the Netflix series. And we all said it, by the way, a year and a bit before the Netflix show was actually released, we all called it and said, this is for the purpose of filming for Netflix. They're using the children, they're using the UN, they're using the tragedy of the World Trade Center, everything for their own gain, for their own image. So is it really surprising that we now have concrete evidence, aside from the Netflix footage, that Meghan tried to use this school as a way to promote her book, which ended up flopping, just like her podcast? Imagine having a press secretary for schools advise you and tell you, sounds a little bit promotion-y. I mean, they saw right through them. But of course, Meghan doesn't care, and by extension, Harry doesn't care because they're shameless, because all that matters to them is their image and getting all that moolah shoved into their pockets. But before I get into the tyrannical aspects of this gag order, I will say I haven't read the documents that The Sun obtained, of course, so I'm speculating here, but I find it difficult to believe that the gag order would have extended to children as young as 5. This was a primary school, I believe. So perhaps it was limited to the staff and every adult on location. But I could be wrong. It could be that the children's parents and guardians had to sign the gag order if it was in fact signed, because the article clearly states that it's unknown whether the agreement was actually signed. Which brings me to the second point, and this has got my lawyer senses tingling. Assuming they signed it, would such an agreement even be valid? To me, it seems that its very nature is unconstitutional. Now, I'm an Australian lawyer. Obviously, I don't know much at all about the US Constitution. So if there are any American attorneys out there or anyone who has the knowledge, do chip in the comment section and let us know, is this a valid agreement? Or would the fact that it goes against the First Amendment render it void? But the legalities aside, honestly, are we surprised? I know I'm not. This has been their agenda from the word go. As far as I'm concerned, the writing has been on the wall as far back as the 8th of November 2016, when the palace released that scathing statement on behalf of Prince Harry, chastising the media and the press for their racism and their misogyny against the then still unknown Meghan Markle. I've always said this. That statement was a red flag if there ever was one. We're expected to believe that in the 1 week between the announcement of their relationship to the release of the statement, Meghan Markle, again an unknown entity, was somehow subjected to so much hate and ridicule that it warranted a statement from the palace. Something that the palace has never done before for a brand new girlfriend. And against who? A woman who self-identified as a Caucasian for her entire life until then, and who is white passing. You look at her, a lot of people say this, and you just think she's a tanned white person at most, and sometimes just a flat out white person. And don't take it from me, she said it in her Netflix series and on her podcast as well, that up until meeting Harry, she had never experienced racism.
Very different to be a minority but not be treated as a minority right off the bat. But obviously now people are very aware of my race because they made it such an issue when I went to the UK. But before that, most people didn't treat me like a black woman.
Now that's not to say that white people don't experience racism, but we all know that that's not her argument. There isn't a shred of evidence of this hate and misogyny in the space of that 1 week in 2016, other than the one article that Meghan keeps referencing time and time again because it still stings her to this very day, the almost straight out of Compton article, which was published only a couple of days before she forced Harry to release that statement. I've said this before in a previous video, but I truly believe that it was this singular article that toppled her over the edge, because that's just how insecure tyrants or despots are. They can't handle anything short of worship. That's why Harry, the Duke of Misinformation himself, became a commissioner on information disorder with the Aspen Institute. Same reason that they tried to gag an entire school in Harlem to literally prevent them from saying anything negative now or in the future. So presumably for the rest of their lives, based on the wording of that so-called agreement. This, ladies and gentlemen, is tyranny at its finest. The very embodiment of censoring free speech by controlling the narrative and choosing what people can and cannot say. And this is why we need free speech more than ever. Because these power-hungry, delusional elites, the Meghan and Harrys of the world, exist. Because they have the gall and the hubris to think that they can decide what people can say. Why else would they have banned 4 newspapers, including The Sun, from an otherwise public area, such as the World Trade Center? Because their insecurities run so deep, they can't even visit a primary school full of the most underprivileged and impoverished children in the country without preparing a gag order. I mean, you really cannot make this up. I've always said that Meghan Markle in particular, and of course by extension Harry, but we all know when it comes to this type of behavior, she is most definitely the ringleader. It's like she's come straight out of the Dark Ages. I mean, I would go as far as to say that she literally thought that that's what being royal entailed. Wielding tyrannical power. I mean, we all remember how she compared the British royal family to medieval times, dinner and tournament. She exposed herself. And it shows that this tyrannical power of censoring people, including potentially children for the rest of their lives, is exactly what she coveted and expected as her royal prerogative. Shouldn't have excluded The Sun from the World Trade Center, huh, Meghan? I mean, they may have played nice if you would have just given them access. Aside from the ludicrous nature of this entire agreement, how it could even cross their minds to do this, it really begs the question, why require something as drastic as a gag order in the first place? What is it about you that is so horrid that you would be so insecure about what teachers or potentially children or their parents could say about you once you visited their school? If you're that worried and insecure about your reputation, perhaps it's time to reflect and consider what's made you so insecure in the first place. I remember reading in Tom Bower's book about how during their Australia tour, even though in the mainstream media it was an absolute success, people loved them, Meghan and Harry still chose to spend every night combing through social media looking for the smallest hint of negativity, sniffing around like bloodhounds. And these are people who apparently preach mental health and seeking therapy. I mean, does anything about that behavior sound healthy to you? Fire your therapists, I say. Clearly, whatever they're doing to you is not working. It's almost tragic. You know, if they were good people, I would almost feel bad for them. Because that's no way to live. Constantly worrying about what people say about you to the point of trying to censor their free speech. Constantly ignoring the positives and only focusing on the negatives. Being so desperate to be on the public stage and be seen as relevant world players when they both so obviously lack the thick skin and the self-confidence and the self-assuredness to be on that stage. I mean, it can't be easy for them. It's a classic case of wanting something so bad, but knowing that you're just not cut out for it. Kind of like Meghan's failed Hollywood career. And we're to understand that this woman has political aspirations? What is she gonna do? Gag the media and her constituents the first chance she gets? Like it's 10/21? I mean, obviously, it'd be unconstitutional, but when has that stopped her before? This gag order seems unconstitutional to me. In a nutshell, tell me you're an insecure despot without telling me you're an insecure despot. And here's the irony of it all, because there's always such a significant dose of irony when I talk about these two. Remember back in their engagement interview when they spoke about how they wanted to change the world for the better, empower the youth of the world, show them the right way, the light. I don't think any of us imagined that this is the type of change that they had in mind. Meghan was seen as a breath of fresh air, someone who would modernize the British monarchy. But instead, what they got was a raging despot with a mindset that belongs in the dark ages. The irony is just never lost on me. So clearly, Meghan and Harry still haven't learned the concept of karma, despite the fact that it keeps whacking them in the face every which way they go. But this is what they get for behaving the way they've behaved and for alienating and making enemies of the media like The Sun. Because like I said earlier, I don't think The Sun would have gone as far as making this freedom of information request to get this information had they simply been allowed to cover the press tour and their visit in New York. But you know what they say, right? Every cloud has a silver lining, and this is what it led to. Exposing the truth. And this is the type of journalism, I mean, if you can call it journalism coming from The Sun, we all know it's predominantly tabloid trash, but this is the type of coverage that Meghan Markle deserve. Exposing them. This is why we keep talking about them on my channel and other channels, of course. Because we've seen the impact it has. People have woken up to the reality of their tyranny, their reign of terror that they want to impose. Can you imagine if these people had actual power? The lengths they would go to gag us and restrict us of our most basic freedoms in the West. I mean, Meghan's so partial to those Saudi Arabian blood diamonds that she loves flaunting. I know we haven't seen them in a while, but there is speculation that that diamond ring on her pinky finger is also sourced from such diamonds. So why not just go live in Saudi Arabia? I mean, I don't want to offend anyone in that part of the world, but we all know that there are certain restrictions that apply there, enforced by the royal family, that simply cannot fly in the West. So we've cracked the code, Meghan. You're simply living in the wrong part of the world. But yeah, just wanted to do my bit in spreading this news because I think it's newsworthy. Definitely more newsworthy than covering her umpteen different ridiculous outfits that she wore in the few days of the Invictus Games, looking at you, Daily Fail. This is the type of journalism and reporting that we need. So hopefully we'll see more of this. And I would really love to know who tipped off the Sun to seek this freedom of information request in the first place. So that intro, embellished as it was, suddenly doesn't seem as dramatic now that we know what it was based on. And that's because, folks, we are actually dealing with 21st century tyrants. After all, the entire concept of freedom of speech is apparently bonkers. Remember? We'd all do well to remember that because we don't want to get gagged, do we?